The so-called world wars had a profound impact on the consciousness of people worldwide. It often plays a central role in popular culture, especially due to the infamous savagery of the Nazi Party under their leader, Adolf Hitler. Even though the focus of the wars were in Europe, Africa and Africans played a significant role in both world wars. And so today, I wanted to talk about the history of Africa's involvement in World War I and II. What up, African world? It's Home Team here, and welcome back to another video of African history, culture, and worldview. By supporting this channel on Patreon, you're helping in the creation of these videos and supporting this content. If you'd like access to full courses and sources, or you simply want to show your support, you may do so by clicking the Patreon link in the description box below. To be honest, upon reviewing the history of both World War I and II, I couldn't help but think that these events presented a great opportunity for Africans all across the continent to liberate themselves from colonialism, because Europe was so preoccupied politically and financially in their war effort. But unfortunately, many Africans did not view it that way, and it was a little more complex than what we might think. In general, the main drive or period of decolonization began after World War II, after Africans came back home and began to realize their rightful place in the world. Anyway, even though World War I began and ended in Europe, it had a profound effect on millions of Africans, as mentioned before. Unfortunately, many African men were dragged into the war because of their colonial subjugators. Colonial powers relied heavily on African natural resources and manpower. Africans were used as porters and soldiers. France enlisted more than 500,000 Africans for the war effort. One Senegalese politician named Blaise de Gane enlisted more than 180,000 West African men, hoping that through African support, colonial powers would give rights and privileges for the Senegalese people. Great Britain also enlisted around 30,000 African soldiers and more than 1 million African porters. Forced labor, or modern-day slavery, was also implemented amongst Europeans. Belgium forced thousands of Africans into supporting the war effort. Even though some Africans willingly enlisted, many were forced into assisting during World War I. However, not all Africans accepted European recruitment efforts. Some Africans resisted in various ways. Some went into hiding, while others actually took up arms against colonial powers. Perhaps one of the more popular African militias during World War I were the Senegalese tirailleurs. The tirailleur soldiers contributed greatly to the First World War, engaging the Central Powers along the Western Front in Europe. Most African soldiers actually didn't fight in Europe, but in Africa. France and Britain used their colonial armies to attack all of the German African possessions. Togoland, today's Togo, quickly fell to Anglo-French forces in 1914. That same year, the Union of South Africa joined the British cause, despite fervent opposition from Afrikaners in the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. The South African forces were sent to conquer German Southwest Africa, now Namibia, in 1915, and quickly took control of the territory. German Cameroon held out a little longer, but eventually fell in 1916. The struggle for German East Africa, however, was quite different. Under the leadership of Paul Lodevorbeck, the German East African forces held out against the numerically superior allies for the duration of the war. German East Africa's army included thousands of African soldiers who actually outnumbered German soldiers by nearly 3 to 1. As mentioned before, after World War I, African men began to develop a new outlook on their condition. Essentially, their complacency as pawns in a much bigger game was obviously not going to go in their favor. And so many began to rise and call for the independence of Africa. Africans were further ignited by Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, which accompanied his League of Nations proposal and promoted the right to self-determination. World War I planted many seeds in the minds of African people, and independence movements became inevitable. World War II had an even greater effect on the African continent. Some people don't view the Second Ethiopian War with Italy in 1934 as a reflection of World War II, but it was. This aggression by the Italians helped to spearhead later events leading to the Second World War. The actual fighting done on African soil was more intense during World War II than in the previous World War. In 1939, in response to Italy's aggression, African forces from all across the continent, along with Britain, quickly routed the Italian armies, giving the Allies their first important victory of World War II. Seldom do we in the diaspora consider the importance of Africa when it comes to the beginnings of the Second World War. Although many African soldiers served in the armies of the European powers during the First World War, these numbers increased dramatically during World War II. For example, more than 80,000 of the well-known Senegalese soldiers from French West Africa were called into immediate service in France during the early stages of the war. Between 1943 and 1945, more than 100,000 African soldiers were added to the French forces, primarily through conscription. France, of course, was not alone in its reliance on African troops. Britain recruited nearly 325,000 soldiers from East Africa alone, with one division playing an important role in the campaign in Southeast Asia. In addition, more than 100,000 South Africans served in Britain's forces, primarily in North Africa. World War II's impact on colonial life in Africa greatly affected the colonies in numerous ways. Economically, due to increased production of food, Africa became more reliant on international markets. Politically, the changes in African society had long-term effects on the continent. As the war ended, African soldiers returned to their homelands with new ideas about their place in the world. Since some Africans served as equals with Europeans during the war, they began to demand equal treatment in all spheres. More importantly, however, was the impact of the Atlantic Charter of 1941, which suggested that peoples of the world have the right to national self-determination. This right to self-determination included Africans and was further guaranteed by the United Nations, which was established in 1945. With these new ideas came radical change. African independence and nationalism movements began to surface, and Africans demanded to be free of colonial rule. Over time, European nations began to relinquish control over African colonies, but of course, this wasn't always a smooth process. Civil unrest broke out all over the African continent, especially in Algeria and the Congo region. The fight for independence is not often viewed from the lens of the world wars, and it's interesting to see the role it played in African liberation. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you like these videos and want to help in its continued production, consider supporting the home team on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.